Vaccaro has been on the scene and on the job in Asbury Park for decades. His stories are legend, and one 30-year-plus story is contained in this book. Johnny Cash is a friend of mine. And we're going to hear that story today with Paul Edelson, president of the Ocean Township Museum. And we'll continue today with another chapter in Henry's life.
Okay, thank you, Henry, for coming. Why don't we start off? Tell us about how you started Kramer Guitar.
Okay. My main business back in the 70s was building construction. I was building all over the state, major projects, hospitals and schools, and mostly public facilities. And the problem was you have to bid for the job. Sometimes you underbid. You have to fight to complete the job. You have to fight with the unions, and at the end you have to fight to get paid. So I decided I'm going to start a little industrial park. And I bought a piece of property in Neptune, and each year my goal was to build another building. So by 1976, I think I had 8 buildings built. A fella came to rent a building for me, and he wanted to start a guitar manufacturing company. His name was Dennis Berardi, and he came with a broker, and I don't know anything about guitars. I mean, I know what they look like. I never played a guitar in my life. And he shows me, he said, we're going to revolutionize the guitar business. He said, we have this guitar, and it's got an aluminum neck. It never breaks, it will never warp, and you get this incredible sound out of it. I said, oh, that's interesting. So I showed him the building. They signed a contract to rent 7,500 square feet of space in a 12,000 square foot building. I put a wall down the center, had a tenant up front, and Kramer took the back. What was interesting, I said, geez, that's kind of nice, that guitar. I said, could I borrow it? I said, are you looking for an investor? He says, we are. Can I borrow it? So I had a construction superintendent named Bill Ryan. He had a son, Billy Ryan, who at the time was the hottest guitar player on the shore, and he played with Bruce Springsteen in the early days. He played with Norman Selden. I mean, he was the hottest blues guitar player in the whole Jersey coast. And I borrowed a guitar and I gave it to Bill. I said, take this home and let your son look at it. Come back the next day and Billy calls me, the son. He said, that's pretty incredible. He says, it got a great sound, but I'll tell you, it's got a couple little problems, a little neck heavy, which meant that it did that. He said, but if you could clean up a couple things, I think you got something. So based on that, Dennis Berardi was going to a guitar trade show in Chicago at McCormick Place. They thought they could sell about $100,000 in guitars. I said, if you match that goal, I'll invest in a company. They give me a business plan and look good. Okay. The show, I believe, was like a Wednesday through Sunday show, and this thing was humongous. I've never seen a show so big in my life. So he calls me up, Henry, you got to fly out here. We're the head of the show. So I got to have my secretary get me a ticket. I think I flew out there like Friday, and we had a couple more, and I couldn't believe this place. We sold $500,000 in guitars, and we're the hit of the show. We got our first major endorsee, was a bass player named Stanley Clark. And not only were we the hit of the show, we had dealers wanting to give us cash in advance to be the first one to have the guitar. That's how much of a hit this was. Wow. I bought a first class ticket coming home. Okay, so now we get home. Now they start to set the factory up. And initially I got to just back up a little bit. There was initially 3 partners. I became the 4th. Dennis Berardi, a guy named Gary Kramer, a man named Peter LaPlaca, who was the former marketing guy at Norland Music, which owned Gibson Guitar Company, and then myself. Well, Gary Kramer worked with a company called Travis Bean that made the first aluminum neck guitar. The only problem was the entire neck was all aluminum and was very cold on your hand. Our guitar was a modification of that, where you felt some of the wood, even though there was a little aluminum, but you felt the wood for a little bit of the warmth. Okay. People ask me, how did the name Kramer come about? Well, usually major guitars are named after people. Martin, Gibson, Fender, Ibanez, they're all people's names. Mm-hmm. Well, Kramer was an all-American sounding name, and here you got 3 Italians and a Kramer. I only found out last year that Gary Kramer was Italian and he changed the name to Kramer.
No.
So that's just crazy. All right, so initially, Gary Kramer was going to head up the manufacturing. Peter LaPlaca was going to do the marketing. I was going to put the money in, and Dennis was going to do the general management and overall observations of the company. Initially, we were going to just be an assembly operation. We had the necks were made by Kaiser Aluminum in Erie, Pennsylvania. Well, after we get home, Kaiser needs a deposit to make the necks. I write out a check $60,000 to pay for the molds. And you pay for the molds to make this because the extrusion is like an aircraft landing gear. I mean, it's the strongest aluminum you can get. And they make a mold and they force it under pressure into this mold, and then they cure it. Out comes the mold. Out comes the neck. So Kaiser was going to make the necks. Dennis had a machine shop at Wall Airport who's going to glue the wood inserts on the back of the neck, going to machine the neck, put the fingerboard on it, turn it on a lathe, and send it back to us as a completed neck. All we have to do is cut the frets in it, put it on the body. Okay. We had another company called Monteith, which was the largest wood supplier in the country of exotic woods. They're based like around the Old Bridge area, and they're going to furnish us a completely finished body, painted and all. So we'll get the body from Monteith, get the neck from Kaiser by way of the machine shop. We get the pickups from somebody else, and we just sit there and put it together. Wrong. wrong.
How many orders did you have coming out of actual
How many orders?
Yeah, coming out of Chicago?
I don't know. I can't give you the number, but it was $500,000 worth. So if the wholesale price might have been like, say, $400 at the time to a dealer, that's a lot of guitars.
It was a lot of guitar.
Yes. Okay. So right away, the minute we get back, like I mentioned, I got to send Kaiser money for the mold. Kaiser calls it up. He says the necks are ready. He said we'll ship them by common carrier. You should have them in 3 or 4 days. We can't wait 3 or 4 days. I said we rented a van and sent it all the way to Erie. The next day he comes back with the neck. Now Dennis takes them over to the machine shop. This is the first problem. The machine shop says, "Oh, that's good. Put them in the back room. I can't start these for 3 or 4 weeks."
Oh, gee.
And he said, "By the way, the price that I quoted you, I cannot honor it anymore because I did some more experimentation. And every time I turn this high speed on the lathe, some of the wood would fly out or the fingerboard would fly out." He says, "This is going to be very costly." So Dennis says, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Dennis, I learned something a long time ago. If you're going to be in business, you have to be in business the right way." I said, "Let's get our own machine shop." So I went to the bank and got a line of credit. And Dennis hooks up with a guy in Pennsylvania and takes him all over the East Coast. And we didn't buy a machine shop, but we bought all the machines that a machine shop would need to make this guitar neck. Got the right machines, but the wrong model.
Oh,
Okay, this is a learning stage. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a local man named Phil Patillo, incredible man.
Ocean Township person.
Yes, Ocean
Yeah.
Township,
And
right down the
very
street.
gifted in guitars himself.
Yeah, and he made, he did all the work on Springsteen's guitars. And in the real world, Billy Ryan sold his old guitar to Phil Patillo, who sold it to Bruce Springsteen.
So
How about that? So anyway, now Phil Patillo was instrumental in designing the original aluminum neck for the Kramer guitars and made the first wood bodies, hooked us up with Monteith and all that. Okay. The neck came in the form of it's like a structural T, in the shape of a T with the fork V at the end. Well, we had to glue wood inserts to the side. We had to glue the fingerboard on, which was made out of phenolic plastic. Then you had to turn that on a lathe at a high speed. The problem was the cutter that cuts this is cutting 3 dissimilar materials. You're cutting the softer aluminum, the harder wood, and then the harder phenolic plastic fingerboard. So as it's turning high speed, the cutter goes down like this. It's creating what they call chatter, like this. So when it came off the lathe, you now had to sand it to get the chatter marks out of it. Okay. Then, so make a long story short, we had a lathe, we had the wrong model lathe because the lathe was so light it caused all this movement. So now, eventually we bought a lathe that was 10 foot long, even though we only needed to cut something 3 feet, but you needed the weight and the bulk of the machine to hold it down, so when you spin it at high speed, you wouldn't get the chatter. Then we eventually bought what's called a true trace milling machine, where you make a copy of the neck and you set it in and it traces it. So initially, we might go through 2 shifts, you might make 7 necks because of the rejection rate. By the time we finish, you'd make 7 necks in an hour. That was the learning curve. So anyway, so in the factory, we start making guitars. And it started to take off little by little. We had a great artist endorsement guy, and it was really going up. But the problem was we're losing money, and the biggest deal we had at the time was called Guitar Centers, which is now all over the country. But back then, they were based in California. The owner's name was Wayne Mitchell, and this guy was a marketing genius. I learned a lot from him. What he did was, there's a thing called area of dominant influence. I might not be correct in the term, but in other words, if you put money into an advertising dollars into a TV ad, it's how many people see that ad based on in that area. So he structured his stores all around different TV stations. So if you advertise on one TV station, it hits all of his stores. So it got more bang for the buck. Other thing I learned about him, when you ship guitars, you didn't ship them to a warehouse, you shipped them direct to the store, and you got paid immediately. He had no accounts payable, took discounts on everything, but the problem, we were not making money because you had to sell to him so cheap, you're trading dollars. I might be jumping all over the place, but some of the stuff I'm going to tell you is pretty interesting because it looks like we might be coming into those times again. So this is in the late 70s, early 80s. And if you recall, the interest rate was as high as 12, 14, 15%.
I do recall that, yeah.
Well, now we're running out of money. I don't have any more money to put in a company. I mean, I got to have money for my construction company because all my projects were bonded, all my P&L statements and financial statements are all audited because the bonding company needs, and they require a certain amount of capital to get these bonds, and I'm doing $30, $40 million jobs. So I couldn't put any more money in the company. I had a line of credit that I put into Kramer besides, but we're losing money. So now,
Let me ask you a question. At this point, are you doing all the manufacturing?
yes, the answer is yes, because another problem we have with the bodies, we would get a finished body from Monteith. But during the assembly process, if you scratch the body, you got to take the whole thing apart and send it back to Monteith for them to finish it again.
Okay.
So we eventually set up a spray booth. Then we got raw bodies, and then we had another company in Connecticut called Sports that would make some bodies for us, and then we would actually finish them in the factory in Neptune. Okay. Now, this is still at the aluminum neck stage, which went from 76 to about 82. We had a line of credit at the bank, what they call a factor line of credit. In other words, if you ship out guitars on Friday, you give the bank the invoice, they give you like 75 cents on the dollar for everything you ship out.
But you got your cash.
Yes, okay. The problem was we're paying 3 over prime. So when interest rate was 14%, we're paying 17% for the money.
Oh, no.
You can't exist like that. Okay, so eventually I worked out a deal to sell the majority of the company to Guitar Centers, which I eventually bought back. And then we hit the goose that laid the golden egg. Okay. During this time period, Dennis, my partner, gets introduced to a man named Floyd Rose. Floyd Rose is the name of a tremolo. The tremolo is this wah-wah bar at the end of the guitar. When you push it down, you get the wah-wah sound.
Wow.
Okay, just prior to that, we had another tremolo called the Rockinger. And we were just ready to sign with Rockinger, and somehow Dennis meets Floyd Rose, got rid of Rockinger and put Floyd Rose. Okay. On an airplane ride to California to meet the president of Guitar Centers, Dennis is on a plane, and he sees some young man that's got a tour jacket on, it says Van Halen World Tour. Dennis goes up to him in the men's room, all right, where'd you get that? He says, I'm Eddie Van Halen's guitar tech. Well, Dennis could sell ice cream to the Eskimos in the winter. Within a half hour, Dennis and this kid are over at Eddie Van Halen's house. Eddie Van Halen becomes our biggest endorsee.
Unbelievable.
Okay. The problem was Eddie did not like the aluminum neck. It was too heavy. Okay. Well, if you had Babe Ruth endorse your baseball bat, you changed to wood too. So that's like that.
After all of that,
After all of that, we changed to wood, and with Eddie Van Halen as the endorsee, when I tell you the sales went from $2 million a year to $18 million a year, uncontrolled. That's the company was the hottest guitar in the nation.
Still in Neptune?
Still in Neptune. But now we went from this 7,500 square feet of the one building to the other 5,000 feet of the same building, so now we're 12,500. Then we took a 10,000 square foot building that was vacant. Then eventually we moved to a brand new 36,000 square foot building that I built on Neptune Boulevard.
Oh, yeah.
So that is just part, I mean, I could talk for hours about Kramer, but it was just, the guitar, there's several magazines, Guitar for the Practicing Musician, voted us #1 in guitars under 500 in price and #1 in guitars over 500 in price, beating out Fender and Gibson. That's how hot we were.
is that how you got to sell it to Johnny Cash?
That's part of it. Okay. We're still in the aluminum neck stage from 76 probably to 81 or so. So I've been a Johnny Cash fan all my life. But being Italian, you're supposed to like Sinatra. I like Johnny Cash, okay? And from the first time I heard him, this haunting sound, it amazed me. Back then, I'm 17 years old, and my father surprised me, and Paul would know this because we were neighbors right across the street. My father buys me a brand new red Corvette car for my birthday. I was blown away. I'd never asked for anything. I wanted a pickup truck, because I wanted to get into construction. So we're driving down Main Street, and my dad was one of a kind. He had office hours 7 days a week, made house calls every night. My mom was his nurse. So during his lunch break, while we're driving to make house calls, he wanted me to go with him. He takes me by Park Chevrolet on Main Street, says, "See that car? Oh man, that's great." He says, "It's your birthday present." I said, "Oh my, I can't believe this."
Of course.
Now, this is probably like June. I'm not 17 until September, so I can't even drive it. Well, I convinced him to get it out of there and bring it home, and I would drive it up and down the driveway. I would wash it every day. I'd park it under the porker shear and blast Johnny Cash music from inside the house while I'm washing the car. So, anyway, so that's my kind of intro into Johnny's music. But I attended one concert probably in maybe 68 or 67 at Symphony Hall in Newark. And then he was the first performer to sell out Madison Square Garden back in probably 69 or 70. Then there was no Ticketron or anything. People just word of mouth. He sells out, 20,000 seats, 3 nights in a row. Anyway. So I'm building a hospital in Secaucus. And back then at the Garden State Arts Center, when a performer would come, the performer would usually spend a whole week there. And they had different series. And I find out Johnny's going to be performing this next summer at the Arts Center, which would have been like 76. And I'm building a hospital in Secaucus. And it was a private hospital called Riverside Hospital. Back then I think they changed the name to Meadowlands, but it was Riverside Hospital. And it was owned by 5 doctors. There were 200 rooms, all private rooms. And I'm in the doctor's office. Dr. Cavelli was the president, and he's having trouble getting all of his financing because the bank wants him to hire a management company. He said doctors don't know how to manage hospitals. So he showed me a brochure. They're going to hire a manager, or at least interview a management company from Nashville called Hospital Affiliates. Doesn't mean anything to me, but I'm waiting for him. I'm thumbing through. I see a picture of a Dr. Nat Winston. Now, a couple months prior to that, I read Johnny Cash's autobiography called The Man in Black, and he attributes Dr. Winston and June to getting him off the pill habit. So I arranged for Dr. Cavelli in Secaucus to call Nashville, talk to Nat Winston, for me to meet Johnny Cash after his concert at the Garden State Arts Center.
You called the doctor to get you into the concert.
Yep,
And to see, and to meet with Johnny Cash.
To
backstage.
meet with, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so after the concert, I introduced myself as being in the guitar business. I wanna have something in common. He doesn't know about construction. I says, I'm in the guitar business. What kind of guitar? I said, we have this brand new aluminum neck guitar. I said, it is incredible. He said, I'd like to see it. He says, we're staying locally, and thank God, back then they stayed at, it was then the Hilton Inn at exit 105 in Eatontown. And he said, come by tomorrow morning around 10 o'clock, I'll introduce you to Marshall Grant, my bass player, and Bob Wooten, my guitar player. Okay, this is another thing. I show up, Marshall Grant is expecting another guitar manufacturer who had made arrangements with the House of Cash, which was Johnny's office in Nashville, to meet him at the thing. That guy doesn't show up, I show up, they think I'm the guy. So I walk right in. You can't believe this, right? Well, within an hour, I got him in my car, and we shoot over to Neptune, 5 miles away, take him to the factory, and that night the entire Johnny Cash band played aluminum neck Kramer guitars on stage at the Garden State Arts Center.
Wow.
Bob played a custom Kramer guitar, Marshall Grant played a bass, and Jerry Hensley played a standard Kramer guitar.
So if you hadn't read his book and found out about Dr. Nelton,
I
it would
know,
never have happened.
never, I mean, that's how
That's
stuff
how
happens.
Right.
That's how stuff happens. So as a result of that, I really became friends with Bob, the guitar player. Now, Johnny only had one other guitar player, Luther Perkins. When they started, the original was Johnny Cash and a Tennessee 2. Marshall Grant played stand-up bass, and Luther Perkins played guitar. And he got that boom chicka boom sound by accident. By accident. And Marshall, in an interview later, says, you know, people ask about that sound. He says, I'll be honest with you. We got it by accident, and we tried many years just to get rid of it, but we couldn't. It was always there in all the music.
That becomes a trademark.
Yes, and he said that's how it started. Well, Luther died in a fire at his home, fell asleep smoking a cigarette, and he died. And Johnny was doing, I think he was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he was doing a show to support the governor. I think his name was Rockefeller, I'm not sure, but so he was doing a show there, and he doesn't have a guitar player because Marshall, they had got another guitar player in Nashville that was going to come out, and their flight got held up in thunderstorms, and here Johnny is on stage with no guitar player. So June's looking around and says, anybody can play guitar? Bob Wooten had driven all the way from Oklahoma, and he knew every Johnny Cash song. So his girlfriend talks to June and says, yeah, my boyfriend can play. They put him on stage. When Bob hit it off, at the end of the concert, he was hired for life. That's how good he was.
Oh,
And then Bob becomes my best friend. So whenever Johnny Cash was performing on the East Coast, their office would send me an itinerary, where they're at, where they're staying at, what time the venue is and all that. And I'd start going there. Well, then people say, well, how did you become friends with Johnny Cash? Well, through his stomach. What do you mean? I said, well, he loved Italian food that you couldn't get in Tennessee. So when he would invite me on the bus to go to the next venue right after a show, I would stop in Bradley Beach at Piancone's Deli, and I'd bring, you know, homemade prosciutto and gabagool and roasted peppers and homemade bread and olive oil, bring it in the cool, put on, and they couldn't believe it. We all would sit at a table and eat on the way to the next venue. So, get to be friends with his stomach. So now, I used to go fishing in Bimini, maybe 3-4 times a year. Big, you know, sport fishing. I mean, tuna and giant marlin and stuff like that. And I would always take some guests with me that my company's doing business with. So I said, hey Bob, would you like to go fishing? Oh yeah. So I invited Bob and Earl Ball, the piano player, to come to Bimini. So we met in Miami, took a seaplane over to Bimini, and we went fishing. That same day, this is in June, I don't recall the year, maybe early 80s, Bob hooks into a giant tuna. When I say a giant tuna, 700-800 pound tuna. It's like a depth charge explodes when this thing hits the line, and he's fighting it, and it broke the line. Now this guy is addicted. Once you get that addiction, you want to go back for more. So we had a great 4 or 5 days there, and so he said, Bob says, Henry, you gotta ask Johnny, he would love this, he loves fishing. Well, in some ways I am shy. I said, I can't ask him, Bob, I'm too embarrassed to ask him. Okay. Maybe 6 or 7 months later, I'm on Johnny's bus going somewhere, and he says, Henry, come back here. And his tour bus was custom made. And it was an MCI bus where everybody else had these, I forget the name, but they all had these Golden Eagles or Silver Eagle. But he had this MCI bus made just for him. So when you walked in, there was a couple of swing chairs on a swivel and one little couch over there. And then you would walk in through a door into Johnny's area. The first thing, there was a bathroom with all gold fixtures, and then you walked in. It was all in black leather, and on one side there was a banquette where he would sit, banquette table, somebody could sit across from him. Over there was a reclining chair with a microphone, all recording equipment and a TV. And at night, the banquette would fold down and the bed would come down out of the ceiling, and that was his bed. And then next was a little kitchen, and in the back was June's area. The entire back of the bus was June's, and dressing room. It was really something to behold, and I had the honor to ride all over the country on that bus. So he says, come here. He says, Bob, tell me about Bimini. He says, I'd love to go. I said, oh my God, really? Let me look at my calendar. He says, I'm free next June, how's that? I said, fine. So Johnny Cash comes to Bimini. These stories are incredible. So now I meet him in Miami. He flies out of Nashville, and we take a seaplane to Bimini. There was this seaplane company called Chalks. They're now out of business because they had a terrible accident where a wing fell off a plane and killed all the passengers. But up until that point in time, it was the oldest airline in the United States. So we get on a seaplane at Watson's Island near Miami Beach. We go down this little ramp into the water, and they crank up the wheels come up, and now we're floating. The pilot guns the engine, all of a sudden it stops. Oh my God, don't tell me there's a problem. He looks back, he said, wait a minute, he said, we got a problem. What's the problem? He said, you two fat guys gotta sit up here to balance the plane so we can take off. Oh my God. Anyway, so we take off. Now we land in Bimini, in choppy Bimini Bay. For some reason it was kind of choppy. So Johnny says, you know, that was quite an adventure. Because that flight. He said, would you mind if we flew back on a Learjet? I said, no, that's okay with me. So there's an airfield over in South Bimini that his sister, who ran his office, Reba, and his office was called the House of Cash. He calls Reba, and that's another adventure, to make a phone call out of Bimini. This is back before cell phones, right? And we had to go to a Radio Shack, which was on the highest point of the island, and there was like a couple of booths, no sound protection, no nothing. And they would, I think they had a radio to Nassau, then it was a cable from Nassau to Miami, then Miami they'd hook you up with the call. So sometimes you make a call, sometimes you didn't. But I overhear him on the call saying, Reba, you gotta get us a Lear in here. So at the end of the trip, a Learjet picked us up at South Bimini and we flew back. So that's kind of, then I really got to be friends with him. I mean,
A bonding situation, yeah.
And did he like the fishing?
Oh, he loved fishing.
Did you catch any good fish?
Yeah, well, no, the biggest fish John Carter caught was a 70-pound wahoo. We caught some grouper, and I'm going to get in trouble with this one, but here we go. One day we're out and the fishing is very slow. We're dragging the baits all over, no bites. So the captain says, do you want to go off the north end of Bimini? He says, there's an old wreck, and he says, maybe there's some grouper there. Fine. A grouper, these big fish. So we go over there, and when you fish for a grouper, they put a wire line on, because the grouper has a tendency to go in the rocks and it'll cut the cloth line. So you either need a long wire leader or a wire line. And these reels had wire lines, so put there like this to pull them up. And we caught 3 or 4 big grouper, 40, 50-pound grouper. So all of a sudden, 2 hours later, the grouper hole is fished out, there's no more grouper there. So the captain he says, hey, way offshore, he says, looks like there's some birds working. Now, what's kind of interesting is you have the current of the Gulf Stream heading north, but you also have currents heading south. And where the two currents meet, it pushes weeds together, and it's called a weed line, and they follow the Gulf Stream, they float with the Gulf Stream going north. Usually there's little bait in a weed line, and little fish feed on the bait, bigger fish feed on the little fish. So he said, maybe we can get some dolphin out by the weed line. Great, so we head out there, and pulls around, and we're heading back south, and I'm sitting in his fighting chair, all strapped in with this big reel. I mean, I'm ready for the action, right? All of a sudden, Captain Jimmy, who's up top, who was another character, something, a real Damon Runyon character, yells to Willie, to me, Willie, he said, get the flying gaff, there's some square-headed grouper. I don't know what he's talking about. He gets his gaff and reaches in, brings on board a 50-pound bale of marijuana.
Oh, gee.
See, Bimini was the closest island to mainland Florida, and when drugs started coming into this country, most of them came through Bimini. When you would see these cigarette holes, these big high-speed boats that would bring drugs in and all that stuff, well, evidently a plane dropped the marijuana bales in the water with a little signal flare, and the boat they're supposed to pick them up doesn't show up. I think we got 6 bales of marijuana. Now, I never even smoked the marijuana in my life, I'll be honest. I didn't inhale it or smoke it yet. But they're in it, double wrapped in plastic with this signal flare that sends a signal to the boat. Now we've got them. First thing Captain did, we get rid of the signal flare and throws it in. And I have a picture in my book of Willie covering up a bale of marijuana so nobody sees it. Now I got Johnny Cash on the boat. So we go inland, I gotta drop him off at the dock. Now in the book, I was not allowed to tell the story because they didn't want Johnny associated with drugs, but it happened. So he goes in with John Carter, his son, and we go in the backwaters of Bimini and sell him for $3,000 a bale. Now I can tell the story because statute of limitations expired, and you can't make this crap up. It's true. So he wouldn't take any money. We whacked up the money with the captain, and very profitable fishing trip. But that's a square-headed grouper. If anybody ever asks you what a square-headed grouper is, you're going to know the answer.
It's a bale.
Yes, okay. So, yeah, but on that day we took several other fishing trips. June came down on 2 trips. My daughter Tony went with us, and we just became a really close family. And they were incredible people.
And that lasted for more than
30
30
years until
yeah.
his death, and the family gave me the highest honor in the world to be an honorary pallbearer at my friend's funeral.
Yeah.
And when he died, well, I had gone to June's funeral, and I could see he wasn't going to make it. I have some pictures of him, and I will not show anybody because I want to remember the good days, not
Yes.
how he looked at those times. But
He was sick at the same time that his wife was.
yes, but what happened? June had elective surgery for a valve transplant. The surgery went fine. The next day she had a blood vessel, a blood clot went to her brain, and she was brain dead. And he had to pull the plug. And then he just went downhill after that.
So,
But another thing, at his funeral, I have a friend of mine, his name is Joe Simmons. At the time he lived in Ocean Grove, he now lives in a farm out in Farmingdale. And his ancestry was Irish, and he played bagpipes every St. Patrick's Day and everything. So I asked him if he'd like to go to Johnny's funeral. He said he would love to because I would take him on some trips with Johnny on, to different concerts that Johnny played. And I said, bring your bagpipes. He said, what for? I said, I don't know, just bring them. He packs his bagpipes and his kilts and everything. And this is why there's a God up there. Strange things happen to me. We check into this little motel, which is down the street from the church where the service is going to take place. And as soon as I come in, there's Lou Robin, Johnny's manager. And I said, Lou, this is my friend Joe Simmons. I said, he'd like to play bagpipes at Johnny's funeral. And Lou says, wow, that's incredible. Let me ask Roseanne. No, I hadn't said anything to Joe about this. So I get a phone call in my room. Henry, it's Roseanne. He says, my dad would love that. So we went to the church and left early. Joe puts on his kilts and we go, and he played the bagpipes at Johnny Cash's funeral.
oh, that's amazing.
Johnny Cash's ancestry is part Scottish.
Oh,
It was so that's just some of the little
and,
stories.
and I read it in your book that he also came to your mother's funeral.
Yes, what happened, this is, I think of this man every day. I mean, you could, when he was in the room, you didn't need to know, you could feel his presence. And he was so humble, and in many ways he was shy. But you knew he was there, and I tell people, he planted a cotton bush in his front lawn to remind him that he came from picking cotton, and he was no better than you and I. And that's the kind of man he was. So he and June fly up to, they're gonna go to my daughter Tony's wedding at the Berkeley, which was gonna be on a Sunday. My mom was ill and she was dying of cancer. So John and June wanna go see my mom. They had met her several times before that. And so they come into her bedroom, she's laying in bed with her nurse. And I have a photo of Johnny Cash kneeling down, holding my mom's hand with his other hand on her forehead, June holding my mother's other hand, and they're praying for her, praying that she'll have the strength to go to the wedding and be out of pain. So this was Saturday, the next day, Sunday, he sends a car to pick her up, meets her at the Berkeley, helps her into the wheelchair, wheels her into the wedding, and spent the whole night with her. And when my mother passed away, he canceled the concert and went to her funeral.
That's amazing. That's
I was
amazing.
at the funeral of his dad, and I was at the wedding of his son John Carter and his daughter Tara. So, we were a pretty close family.
I'll ask you to tell one more story, and that was about how he brought you back to religion.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I became very close friends with Bob Wooten, and he invited me to be an usher at his wedding, 1982, in Philadelphia, Mississippi. He married a gal from Philadelphia. So I fly out, I'd given him the measurements ahead of time, and they had a tuxedo waiting for me in a little anteroom behind the church. I put the tuxedo on, walk around. The door of the church opens, and behind the altar is a giant Confederate flag in the church. They're walking down the aisle, and they're not playing Here Comes the Bride. They're playing Dixie. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. So Bob and his bride get married. Vicky was her name, and afterwards they had a little reception, and Johnny says, well, Henry, you gotta get back to New Jersey, don't you? I says, I do. He says, I have a Learjet coming, and he says, John Carter and I are going into our apartment in the city. Can we drop you at Teterboro? It's fine with me. Now then, this is in 82, prior to them getting an apartment in the Berkeley. They had sublet an apartment from Liza Minnelli on Central Park South. And they had that for several years in the city. So on the plane, it's like flying in a bullet. And my first experience in a Learjet. I mean, this thing is incredible. So it probably held 12 passengers. So I'm over here on the right, Johnny's on the left, and behind us were 3 seats together. John Carter is sleeping, lay down, he's sleeping. Now one thing, I always gave Johnny his space. I never was on top of him. Everybody wants to know this and that. I mean, the guy, hey, he gets out all day. I'll leave him alone. But I glanced over, he's reading the Bible. I don't know, I'm reading some magazine, whatever was on the plane. Next thing, it's thunder and lightning. Plane is shaking. He said, Henry, I never hear you talk about God. I didn't say anything. He said, what church do you go to? I said, yeah, Johnny, I don't go to church. How come? I went just like this. I said, it's a long story you don't want to hear. He says, yes, I do. And I'm saying under my breath, oh shit, what am I going to tell him? Right? I told him the truth. I said, I was raised Catholic, and I had problems with the church. He said, well, what kind of problems? I said, well, I'm building a Catholic high school in a town called Piscataway, and we had problems on the job with the architect. The architect made a lot of mistakes, and he wanted me to cover them up. And I wouldn't, because I noticed that some of the brickwork is starting to crack. I said, I can't be responsible for this. So the architect tried to throw me off the job, bring somebody else on to hide everything. So the job was stopped, and I had an audience with the bishop, Bishop George W.R. I knelt down, I kissed his ring, I said, I did all the right stuff. The bishop says, after our meeting, he says, I've got to get my school finished. He says, we'll make sure you get paid. We hired another architect to make the corrections, but since he's our guy, it's the architect of record, I can't throw him off the job, but this guy will oversee the corrections and will make sure that you get paid. I says, fine. I said, Johnny, they never paid me. I says, I had to sue him, and I says, I won. I'm proud. I'm like 28 years old. I take on this big church, and I won. He looks at me, Henry, he says, remember something, the bishop is a mortal man, and he sins too. He says, there's a God up there, you should go back to church. Now I'm trying to change the subject. I mean, this is the 80s. I mean, I own a guitar company, I own a hotel, a house on the ocean, I'm big construction. Who needs church? A year or so later, my whole world is starting to fall apart. The partnership with Carabetta and the redevelopment is not working. I'm having problems in the guitar factory. I got problems with my life and everything. So one morning I wake up, I had just gotten divorced. I'm now back home in Interlaken, living in a big house with my mom. And one Sunday morning I wake up, probably 8:30, and I hear this voice, Henry, go to church. Turn the TV on a little louder, pull the covers over my head, go back to sleep. 11 o'clock, I wake up again. Henry, go to church, and I got chills. I got dressed. The hardest thing I ever did was to sneak in the side door of Mount Carmel Church on Asbury Avenue, and I felt so embarrassed. But I got this peaceful feeling that came over me that I could handle anything that was going to happen in my life. Started going to church regularly now. So maybe, I'm not sure at the time, for maybe 6 months later, June calls up, and she said, Henry, can you get us a limo at Newark Airport? We're flying in on such and such a date. And we're going to spend a weekend at the Berkeley and put it on our credit card. I said, no. I said, I'm going to pick you up. I said, tell Johnny I went back to church. She says, he'll be so proud of you. I don't think anything of this. Gets in the car. I'm driving. He's over there. June said, you went back to church. I said, I did. He says, you go every Sunday? I said, yes. He said, what service do you go to? I said, I go to 10:30 Mass. He said, oh, okay. Come by the hotel and pick me up. I'm going with you. He's Baptist, I'm Catholic. So for the next 5 times that Johnny Cash ever came to Asbury Park, he went to church with me, including the Sunday morning after being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Then Saturday night before at the Waldorf Astoria, he came to Asbury to spend the weekend at the Berkeley and go to church with me.
Son of a gun.
Okay, so this story gets better. There's a new priest at church, Father Daniel, and when he said the homily, you listened. I mean, this guy had a powerful voice, and you just were mesmerized, and you listened to him. So I now want to get to know Father Daniel. I had known Father Gerard, who was a pastor, but he was meek and mild compared to this monster, right? So I took Father Daniel out to dinner, and he says, got to ask you a question. He says, was that Johnny Cash I saw in church? I said, yes, Father. He says, is he your idol? I said, well, you could say that, but he's just a close friend of mine. I says, who's your idol? He said, Billy Graham. I said, that's, wow. I said, a Catholic likes Billy Graham? He said, I love Billy Graham. 6, 7 months later, phone call, Johnny Cash. Henry, he says, I'm doing a crusade in Central Park with Billy Graham. Would you like to come? I said, can I bring Father Daniel? He said, of course. So up to New York we go. Meet Johnny at the plaza, at the Hotel Plaza today. They had brunch waiting for us. Put us in a limo, go backstage at Central Park. Father Daniel meets Billy Graham, and that night we all went to dinner together. You can't make this stuff up.
It's a one. It's right. It really is.
Fantastic.
And I haven't missed church since, except when I was ill or something. And one thing, I don't push my religion on anybody. That's personal. But I know what it did for me, because later I would go bankrupt. I would lose everything I worked my whole life for, and somebody would jump off a building, but I didn't. I'm a fighter, and that inspiration by going to church kept me going.
Tell us about how the episode with Michael Jackson occurs in your life.
Okay, that's a weird one. Back when Kramer Guitar was going full blast, it started probably in the late 70s. We made a custom guitar for Tito Jackson. It was a white Kramer guitar with a V-head aluminum neck with rhinestones around it, and his name in rhinestone, Tito. He loved the guitar. Then later on in the mid-80s, when we changed to wood neck guitars, the Jacksons had their victory tour. The entire band played wood neck Kramer Guitars, and the bass player played a Spectre bass, which was another company that we owned. So that's my inroads into
Okay.
the Jacksons as far as the guitar company is concerned. Okay. In the 80s, I became the developer of the beachfront in Asbury. My brother and I had bought the Berkeley Carteret Hotel, which we talked about the last time. We restored it, won an award as probably the best project in the nation using public and private funding. And I then became my brother and I, a 33% limited partner with Carabetta in the beachfront redevelopment. By the late 80s, around 88, 80 or so, I could sense that Carabetta didn't think this was a right fit with us, and we both had different views on what should be done, okay? But anything that I ever had with Carabetta was never personal. It was always business, and that's a trait that I did learn from him. You don't hold grudges, you don't, if something happens, it's not perfect, it's the way each person did business, but I can handle that. So, I meet a guy named Frank Harris, black man, lives in Eatontown, probably 6'3", big guy. And he says, the Jacksons are interested in Asbury Park. And I said, what Jacksons? I don't know who he's even talking about. So he shows up at my office, which was on Highway 66. Okay, and he's got coveralls on that say Joe Green's Texaco. So I later found out he was a bodyguard for Joe Jackson, and when he wasn't working on the road, he would take odd jobs, and he was a tow truck operator for Joe Green, picking cars up on him. And he comes in all full of grease and everything. And my secretary, Helen, meets him and says, how can I help you? I want to see Mr. Henry. So I come out and I said, you got to get rid of this guy. What does he know about the Jacksons? So comes back a few days later, all dressed up, gets Helen, he says, dial this number. She don't know what, she dials the number and then puts me on the phone. Is Joe Jackson the father? And he says, Frank tells me that you have this big development in Asbury and you're looking for maybe us to get involved. We'd love to be involved in a project like this. He says, make the arrangement with Frank. He said, we're going to fly out and meet you. Wow. I had to pay first class airfare for Joseph Jackson, Catherine Jackson, the lawyer, and the lawyer's wife.
No kidding.
$12,000 fly them from California out to New Jersey, put them up in a hotel, furnish them a limousine, the whole 9 yards. And they weren't interested in the project. So nothing materialized at that point in time. So they fly back home, and I still have a letter from them stating that they're interested in the project, but not interested in putting money in, interested in using their name, and you pay them for their name. That was the interest. So, as I mentioned earlier, by the late 90s, the housing market was terrible. We had this nationwide savings and loan crisis where banks failed all over the country, and there was problems in the development. The Bank of Boston pulled the plug on the high-rise building, wouldn't advance any more money. So Carabetta, who was probably one of the smartest men I've ever known, he's still alive, he's got to change the whole concept of the project because you can't get financing for residential, but you can get financing for commercial. So he brings on board a guy named Bob Petralia, who was formerly a group vice president of Warner Communications based in New York, the giant Warner Brothers,
Yeah.
big time. Well, he was a group vice president. I don't know what specific group he was the vice president, but somehow he was introduced to Carabetta. He leaves Warner and hooks up with Carabetta, comes up with a new plan called America Showcase, or Showcase America. And it got rid of the residential component, but brought on board 3 major 60,000 square foot pavilions. One for Jacques Cousteau, who he'd known personally, one for the Jackson family, and one for Ringling Brothers. Now everybody thinks of Ringling Brothers because of the circus, but the circus was really a smaller part of their whole conglomerate. They had something called Cosmic Journey, which depicted man's space flight, so they were going to put that in Asbury Park, along with a space camp. And they had signed contracts from everybody, now they need the Jacksons. So Petralia heard that I had brought them to town through Frank Harris, Carabetta flies the whole family in, and they sign an agreement to do this Jackson Educational Pavilion. So now based on, you got Cousteau for undersea, you got Jackson's for entertainment, and you have Ringling for space. Then they were gonna build a big arena. I mean, it was all in the works. And then Carabetta went bankrupt. And so that's how the Jacksons then got back into town. So when Carabetta went bankrupt, Petralia is out of a job. Well, he had befriended the Jacksons so much so that he flew to California and set up a corporation for them called Jackson Communication Inc., JCI. Meanwhile, this is the early 90s, and I'm in a bankruptcy because of the hotel, because I had sold my interest to Carabetta. He never paid a penny on the buyout because he went bankrupt. And the only thing I have left is Kramer Guitar, which I now own 100% of, and I put it into a Chapter 11 to protect it. Petralia gets wind of that, and he says, and he shows me, I have the original draft of the business plan that was made for JCI. I have the company organization chart, and they had all these different entities they wanted to get involved in. One was music, one was television shows, movie production, nightclubs, they even had the Stone Pony on there. Another was musical instruments, and they had Kramer Guitar penciled in. So they want to buy Kramer Guitar. So they come in, and now I had put Kramer in Chapter 11, and to make a long story short, they agreed to fund a plan of reorganization of Kramer Guitar. And one thing in bankruptcy, you can cram down your creditors. I don't like it, but that's one way. You cram them down, and they got to take 10 or 15 cents on a dollar, but sometimes you can put enough money in the company to get it going again for the benefit of everybody. So they signed to fund a plan of reorganization, and they make the first payment. They only owed it like for less than $1 million, they get this entire company. So they signed a contract to fund a plan of reorganization. The first payment is like $225,000. They make the payment. 6 or 8 weeks later, the second payment is due. They ask for an extension. The judge grants them an extension. A month goes by, they don't make the payment. Why? Michael gets in trouble with the first allegations of child molestations. And I can sit here and tell you, I don't know if they're true. I never saw any indication of that in all the memorabilia and files that I seized. I have no knowledge of that. But it was enough to scare away the investor. Who do you think the investor was? Pepsi Cola.
Big one.
Pepsi Cola was going to invest in JCI, and they walked away. Now the family doesn't have the money, so they default. I'm converted from a Chapter 11, which means reorganization, into a Chapter 7, which means everything gets liquidated and sold off.
That's for Kramer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll get sold off, and Gibson eventually bought the Kramer brand, and right now they're resurrecting it.
Is that right?
Yeah. But I'm starting up Vaccaro Guitar Company. I developed a new patent on an aluminum neck myself.
You mean now?
Right now. We're going to do a Kickstarter program in about
You're going back to
6
the
weeks.
aluminum?
Yes. I got rid of all the negatives. I got rid of the weight because now, as I mentioned, it was neck heavy. It would do this. So now the weight is the same as a wood neck because instead of the forging, I've used an extrusion. An extrusion is a lighter gauge of aluminum in the shape of a double T, which gives you more strength than a single T at a fraction of the weight. And at the end, I developed a patent on a connection to put any design headstock instead of the V. You want a Fender design headstock, snap it on. So, and then the entire back of the neck is wood, so you feel the warmth of the wood, the strength of the aluminum, and the sound of the aluminum. Blows your mind. So I'm going back in the guitar.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's good to know. Okay.
And it's going to be made in the United States. Okay. This is a crazy story, and I have not told this or shared this with anybody. This is what ingenuity can do. Okay. So they're going to have an auction in bankruptcy court, and they're going to auction off the Kramer Company. They're going to auction off the name Kramer, the name Spectre, and then everything that's in the factory. I'm desperate to try to get my company back. Okay. I had a friend of mine named Joe Aney, a very, very wealthy Iraqi Sephardic Jew that lived in Deal, extremely wealthy man. And he had in fact loaned the Jacksons money from time to time. I never knew he loaned Michael $1 million. So now they're gonna have Monday morning is gonna be an auction in federal bankruptcy court in Trenton, New Jersey. Okay. The prior week was the week of the NAMM show, National Association of Music Merchants in Anaheim, California. So the prospective buyers for the name Kramer, which was a company called Court Guitar Company, because they made a Korean model for Kramer, owned by a man named Jack Westheimer. And then Stuart Spector, who we bought the Spector company from, he wanted to buy his name back, and then you have somebody else who will buy everything in the factory. I had a friend of mine, Andy Papiccio, who was a plant manager of Kramer, who kept the Floyd Rose brand name and marketed Floyd Roses at the guitar show. So we were talking, and he said, hey, Stuart's coming up on Monday to buy his name back, and he's got $75,000 he put together to buy his name back. So now I know that's all he's got. Okay, I walk in the court. As soon as you walk into the left was a payphone, not in a booth, on the wall. So you could hear what's going on. And I hear these two lawyers are talking to Jack Westheimer. Said, okay, Jack, so we can bid $125,000. Yes, that's it. So now I know that's what he's gonna bid. I don't have a penny, but I got Joanie. So this is another thing I learned. If you ever go to an auction, you sit in the back, because you can see what's going on in front of you, who's raising their hand and who's not, and what conversation's going on. So, and I knew Stuart Spector, and so they're auctioning off the name Spector. And I think he's up, he says, I bid 70,000. That's what Spector said. I raised mine at 75. He looks at me, I said, keep going, Stuart, I got Joe, and I said, I'm gonna get this back. He leaves, he's pissed and walks out. So for 75,000, I got the name Spector. Okay. The other guy's 80, 90, 100, he bids 120, 126,000. I look, I said, keep going, I'm getting this back. They walk out, 126,000, I got the Kramer name. Now there's nobody to buy everything that's in the factory because all the tooling is for these. So for $25,000, I get everything in the factory. Whole package is like $200,000. I don't have a penny. I don't have a penny. So the judge says, would a buyer please come up? Walk up. Says, let's see. He says, what's your name? I said, Henry Vaccaro. Oh, okay, Mr. Vaccaro. He says, let's see. You have your certified check for $20,000? I said, well, Your Honor, you don't call for a certified check. He looked at me. He said, what do you mean? I said, read this. It says cash equivalent, or certified check. I said, here's my personal check, it's equivalent to cash, when you cash it. He looked around, he takes it. I don't even have money to cover the check, but I got Joe and these. Now we drive back, and Joe loans me the 20 to cover the check. Right? Now I have until Friday to come up with $180,000. I don't have no $180,000, but I figure Joe and he will help. So Joe says, Henry, he says, I'll give you half if you can get somebody else to give us the other half. Okay, I had a close friend of mine who owned a restaurant, and I don't want to disclose the name or anything. I go to him. We had lunch there, and the guy's going to put the other half of it. Oh my God, thank God, this is a dream come true. But then Joe, and he said, well, he says, you're going to understand something. My money goes in first. I get my money out first. Joe gets up and goes to the men's room. My friend said, do we need this guy? I said, well, where's the other money coming? He said, I'll give it to you. Wow, so get rid of Joe. He said, come see me Sunday morning. Now, meanwhile, that Friday, I needed the other $180,000. So I get a call from the banker who I knew, Ed Rogers was his name, and he said, I'm coming in at 4 o'clock for the other $180,000. Do you have the certified check? I says, I got a problem. What's the problem? You don't have it? I said, no. I said, Joe Eddie's going to give me the money, but it's coming from the Prudential account he has, and he won't have it until Monday morning. Oh, thank God, he says. Monday morning at 9 o'clock is the same as 4:30 in banking terms on Friday. I'll see you Monday morning. Still don't have the money. So my friend invites me over, takes me upstairs. Sunday morning, gives me a box. He says, count it. $180,000 in cash. But he gave me a test. It was an Italian test. count the money. I said, if you say it's here, it's all, no, I want you to count. I counted it twice, I'm there a couple hours. I said, there's $100 too much here. Really? That was the test. As broke as I was, he knew that if I took that $100, my credibility was no good. I shook his hand, never signed a note or nothing. That's how I got Kramer back. Then I brought some other guys in who squeezed me out, and they sold it to Gibson. True story.
Here for the first time.
Yeah, you did. You told that story.
Yeah, that's great.
Tells you about an auction.
So
Okay, so what happens is, they defaulted. I sued them. I got a judgment of $1.5 million against JCI, Jackson Communications.
They're in California?
Yes, in California.
You're going back and forth?
Not then.
Uh-huh.
If this was a Delaware corporation, and I sued them, and they defaulted, they didn't even show up in court. This is another story. Frank Harris, the guy that I mentioned to you, who was Joe's bodyguard, shows up all dressed up in a suit in bankruptcy court in Trenton. I said, Frank, what are you doing here? Joseph sent me in the phone. He said, you're going to lose, Henry. He said, he got this big time law firm. You're going to lose. I said, Frank, if I lose, I lose. At the end of the day, no lawyer shows up, and I get a default judgment, which is the easiest judgment to overturn because everybody's entitled to their day in court. So my lawyer is Jimmy Aaron, and Jimmy was brilliant. He says, Henry, I'm going to give you some good advice. Don't do nothing. Don't get it past the appeal period. Maybe it was like 30 days. Don't even say nothing. Play dumb. Then you got him after the period is passed. Appeal period is passed. Now I got the judgment. I'm going to just jump forward because it's an important part of the story. Then I'll come back to it. When I eventually seized a warehouse full of all their memorabilia, I took all of their filing cabinets, brought it back to New Jersey. And as I'm going through the file cabinets, there's an unopened letter from the Fine Silver Law Firm in Short Hills, New Jersey. I open the letter. Dear Joseph, the hearing on the Vaccaro matter is Thursday. We will not appear because you still owe us $35,000. Get another lawyer. He doesn't open a letter. No lawyer shows up, and I get a default judgment. How about that? Crazy, right?
That's
Okay.
got to be a seminal part in your whole story.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how it
Because
ends.
a default can be overturned.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, get the judgment. I can't collect. I hear back from their lawyer, you sued a corporation, no money in a corporation. Well, it took me 3 years, and because when I sold them Kramer, I allowed them to use the facilities at Kramer Guitar for their corporate offices of Jackson Communications. So they left all their files there, so I had all their files. I went to court and proved fraud. The judge ruled that the Jackson family failed to meet the test to even own a corporation in the state of New Jersey. He says they never capitalized the company, yet they declared dividends and took the money out and put it in their pocket. So I got personal judgments against every stockholder. How about that? So now, here's the next problem. The laws in California are designed by lawyers to protect lawyers and celebrities. So if I have a judgment against you, I gotta serve you. But if you're Michael Jackson, you're so surrounded by security, I'm never gonna get within a mile of you. And if your lawyer won't accept it, you don't get them. So I could never serve Michael or Janet. But I was comfortable. I had Mr. and Mrs. Tito, Randy, Reeve, Marlon, Jack, and Jermaine. $1.5 million I'm gonna collect. Okay. And I'm gonna tell you some personal things because they're true and they're an integral part of this. We got it through Jim Aaron. We got a collection lawyer in California for 30% of the money he collects. He's gonna collect the money, and that's his fee because I didn't have the money to pay him. I didn't have the money to fly to California to even take the deposition of the mother and father. I had a friend of mine named Mike Fight, God rest his soul, he passed away a couple of years ago. I built some major projects for him. And he had an office in Trenton, and I called him up and I said, Mike, I said, you have time to see me? He said, of course. So I go up there. He says, well, what can I do for him? I said, I really need to borrow $3,000. He said, what for? I said, I got to get this judgment. I got to go out and collect it. I says, I can pay you back when I get them. He says, I'm giving you $5,000. He says, I don't wanna get paid back. He says, you made a lot of money for me when you were on top, that's the least I could do was help you, give me $5,000.
Terrific.
Fly to California, take the deposition, and they flat out lied. Flat out lied. Mrs. Jackson said she had no cars, no bank accounts, fake jewelry, no fake furs and costume jewelry, and the old man said the same thing, nothing. Okay. I asked permission from my lawyer if I could talk to Brian Oxman, who was the family lawyer. He says, what for? I said, I want to see if I can make a settlement. I said, Mr. Oxman, I said, I have this judge over $1 million for, I really need money. If I could get $200,000 within 30 days, I'll settle this whole thing. I'm here to make sure you get nothing. That's what kept me going. He's now disbarred. I'm still here. Okay, that kept me going. You're gonna get nothing. Okay. So now, the lawyer draws him back to the hotel. He says, I hate to tell you, I don't think you're gonna collect $1.5 million. They don't have any money. I said, they're lying. I was at their home in Encino for a week. Well, I'll try. So I checked in the hotel and I called a friend of mine, Mark Nelson, who was from Deal, who moved out to California. I need somebody to commiserate. And I told him what happened. You gotta get a detective. I said, Mark, I don't know any detective. I know somebody. Okay. He goes home, gives me a guy's name. He said, call this guy. Well, I call and get voicemail. Sorry, your call is important. I'm out of the country. Call me next Wednesday. Okay, well, I now call home to my son Henry, who we just got a computer, 1999. He says, Pop, he says, let me look on the internet, maybe I can find a detective while you're still in California. So he calls me in the morning, he said, there's a guy right down the street from you. I don't know him from Madden, call him up. We get a guy named Frank Kunis. He says, you have what? I said, personal judgments against the whole family. He said, interesting. You have a writ of execution? I said, yes. Has it been transferred to California court? I said, yes. The next words out of his mouth, I hate the friggin' Jacksons. I said, what? He said, they screwed a friend of mine and the poor guy lost his house. Mister, you don't know me from Madden. I would do this for nothing if I didn't have to earn a living. Now I know I got the right detective. He said, here's what I need when you get home. I'm going to give you a proposal for 32% of the recovery. You're going to get me and a lawyer that bites it, doesn't let go. Get rid of that other lawyer. And I need a copy of the judgment. If you have a judgment in one state, it has to have a state seal on it to take it to another state. So I had to get a seal of the Secretary of State of New Jersey to send this to California. Well, meanwhile, I now have the transcript where the mother and father lied. So, send it out there. That's when he says, I'll collect this, get rid of your other lawyer, we're going to give you a package deal. Okay. Maybe a month later, I'm walking on the boardwalk, and I stopped in the Adriatic restaurant, and I don't think, there were not cell phones. I don't know how I got the phone call, but anyway, he says to me, Frank Kunis, he says, do you get a TV show called Inside Edition? I said, yes. He said, put it on. I said, what for? He said, put it on. So at the Adriatic, there's one little TV, and there's a guy there watching the Yankee game. I said, could I please put on Inside Edition? Well, I'm watching the Yankee. I said, please, it's important to me. So here you see on Inside Edition, there's a lawyer, my lawyer, is being interviewed with a tow truck. He said, we just seized these 2 Rolls Royces to benefit our client, Henry Vaccaro, Contractor in New Jersey. Everybody in the place applauded.
They were from the Michael Jackson's parents'
Yeah,
home.
so 2 Rolls Royces,
They
yes.
were being towed away?
Yeah, I still have that video somewhere.
They don't have anything.
Nothing. So now the detective goes to work. This guy was brilliant. I talked to him last week, as a matter of fact. And this is back in 1999, 2000 era. And the next thing he did was he couldn't find any hidden bank accounts because there's so many people named Jackson in California, and by the time he traces them, you know, he created a sting. He set up a phony company, and he sent the whole family a $30 refund check. And would you believe 3 of the jerks cashed the check? And when you turn it over, it's all their bank account information. We got 11,000 out of those accounts.
Amazing.
Then with that was a letter. If you think you're entitled to more of a refund, please call this toll-free number. Randy calls a number, they trace back where he's living and take his Mercedes for a $30 phony check. Okay. So now he really goes to work. As they went through the glove compartment, they found an insurance card from State Farm Insurance. The lawyer, Steve Fernandez, this guy is so good, I wish he'd practice in New Jersey. That's how good this lawyer was. And he subpoenaed State Farm Insurance because they found an insurance card, and they refused to honor the subpoena. He went to court, and a judge issued a bench warrant to arrest the president of State Farm of California for failure to honor a federal subpoena.
Wow.
Now they send the file. In the file is a copy of a canceled check where Mrs. Jackson paid for the insurance from a bank account she said she didn't have. Now we know where she banks. So the lawyer calls the bank up, says, I have a warrant to satisfy judgment. Finds out there's like $18,000 in the account. He says, I'll be there tomorrow after court. When he went there, the money was gone. Somebody tipped her off and she closed the account. Goes back to court. The judge issues a sealed subpoena for the chairman of the board of Wells Fargo Bank to give us Mrs. Jackson's last 2 years of bank statements and canceled checks. Now you know how much comes in and where does it go. That's
So I went right to the top,
Yeah.
right to the top of Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For his eyes only, because
Yes.
people in the bank were leaking information.
Uh-huh.
So I'm sure he had to tell other people, but it was all confidential. So now with that information, they trace back that every month Mrs. Jackson is writing a check to a warehouse in Oxnard, California. So my lawyer...
This is where the good part is.
Huh?
This is the good part.
So he said, what do you think, sir? I says, all their memorabilia. How do you know? I said, wait a minute, I got something. Well, prior to that, several years earlier, when I sold them Kramer, I'm on the advisory board of directors of JCI, and they flew me to California to attend a 5-day workshop in Havenhurst, a family home in Encino. And one of the documents that I kept was a deal where they're gonna start a restaurant division called Jackson Street, patterned after the Hard Rock, except this would just have Jackson family members. And in the document, it lists everything they have, and Tito has been collecting it. Well, the warehouse was in Tito's name / Jackson Main Event. So with my document, they go to court to get a seizure order, 7 U.S. Marshals and a locksmith is sent on the warehouse, and they opened it up. Now, the marshals are going through this stuff, and some of it was Michael's and Janet's. He says, you can't touch that because you don't have a judgment against them. You can take everything else. So my stuff goes out and goes to a bonded warehouse. This is locked now with a seal U.S. Marshal, do not enter. My stuff goes to another place where it's inventoried and all that good stuff. Well, one thing led to another. They were afraid of what was in the warehouse because of all these child molestation allegations. So the whole family filed bankruptcy. 7 members filed bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
I got to give everything back. Because under the law, anything happens within 90 days of bankruptcy is for all the creditors. Got to give back 2 Rolls Royces, the Thriller piano that we seized out of their living room, and all this member. And I am devastated. From emotionally high, I'm on the floor getting beat up again. But there's a God up there, looks over my shoulder all the time. This is what I learned in bankruptcy court. A trustee has a duty to bring as much money as he can for the creditors without spending as much money to get it. Well, he seized a lot of real estate in Gary, Indiana, in Las Vegas, in Alabama, brings out and sells that. Now there's argument going on who owns what and who doesn't own what in the warehouse. He doesn't want to get involved in the argument. He already lined his pocket with the cheap way out. So he goes to court and a judge signs an abandonment order. They're going to abandon all the property in both warehouses. The one where mine is in, the one left behind it was in Tito's name, back to Tito Jackson, providing he pays the $60,000 in storage.
Oh.
The first time in the history of court, the judge gives somebody something and takes it back. 2 months go by, Tito doesn't pay the storage because the same dopey lawyer, Oxman, says, I'm going to get Vaccaro to pay this because it's all him transporting the $60,000, mostly moving in storage in the other warehouse. They don't pay the storage. Trustee goes back, what do I do, Your Honor? He canceled the abandonment order and says, sell it. I called my lawyer, unbeknownst to what had happened, and I said, you gotta call the trustee, what's going on? Calls the trustee, says, I'm gonna have an auction. Wow, how much do you want? He says, you can give me $80,000, $60,000 for the warehouseman, $20,000 for my legal fees, I'll recommend an auction. Okay, so I need a deposit, so the lawyer I'm talking, I said, good, I have some money now, I'm back in business, I got back on my feet. Henry, you can't bid. So what do you mean I can't bid? He said, under the law, you're considered an insider. Insiders can't bid, which was great legal advice. Thank God he gave that to me. Do you know anybody with a corporation? Sure. I had a friend of mine, Elmer Kendrick, had a corporation called Elrich Corporation, and on paper I had nothing to do with it, but I made a side deal with him. Give him a piece of the action, I'm going to get the rest. Submits a bid, it gets accepted, subject to a bankruptcy auction on the 3rd of January 2002. Next problem, Elmer's in the hospital, can't go to the auction. What do? Well, I had an affidavit drawn up naming my son-in-law, Mark Bahari, as the acting president of Elrich Corporation. Elmer signed it and sealed it, and he and I fly to California. Mark's my son-in-law. Fernandez, the lawyer, meets us at the airport. I never tell him that Mark is my son-in-law, he's just the acting president of Elrich. Next great piece of legal advice. Henry, I can't represent Elrich because I represent you. I suggest that Mark hire Mike Kelly, a very good lawyer that I know. Mark hires Kelly. Kelly was a genius. The first thing Kelly did was say, who do you owe the $60,000 to? I said, the warehouse. He goes to the warehouse and we buy the lien for $40,000 cash. So day one we made $20,000. And in California, the lien perfects the title. If you remember, Paris Hilton lost some stuff in the warehouseman sold it because she didn't pay. That gives the guy the title. So the next day is court. Mark goes to court with Kelly. I'm at a Marriott pacing up and down like my life depends on it. The auction's at 2 o'clock, 1:45, my cell phone rings. Henry, we're gonna lose. What are you talking about? Mr. Jackson's here. She's got a bodyguard, she's got a lawyer. We're gonna lose. Oh my God, calm down. 10 minutes later. Tito's here, Randy's here. Oh, Henry, Michael Jackson's lawyer's here. I know we're gonna lose. Oh my God, you're gonna give me a heart attack. Please, calm down. 15 minutes later. Henry, you won't believe this. Nobody had a certified check. We got everything for $20,000. Oh my God.
They didn't bring
A
a certified check.
Now, Michael's lawyer stands up. Your Honor. He said, who are you? I'm the lawyer for Michael. You have no standing in my court. Your client never put in a third-party proof of ownership, and he failed to reach into his multi-million-dollar wallet to even pay $50 to have the security guard open a door. You have no standing in my court.
Wow.
Okay. So now my son-in-law gets a bill of sale. Now we paid everything, but then the judge says I have 7 days under California law to sign the order. The bill of sale is no good until the order's signed. I fly back on a JetBlue flight. 7 days later, fly to California, which is a Wednesday. No order. Come tomorrow. Thursday, there's no order. I'm getting a little bit worried. Friday, there's no order, and now I am paranoid, figuring there's some hometown hanky-panky going on. Well, the judge knew what I didn't know. The judge knew that this great lawyer, Brian Oxman, was going to file an appeal. But you can't appeal until you get the signed order because you don't know what you're appealing from. The judge signs the order at 4 o'clock Friday and closes the court. 10 minutes later, this guy runs into court with the appeal. Court's closed. Court is normally closed until Monday. Monday is a federal holiday, Martin Luther King's birthday. Court's closed till Tuesday. Now with that order, Loews from Neptune sent out 2 65-foot trailers, which we loaded all Friday and Saturday night. Come Tuesday, they're in New Jersey. And
Wow.
something I found out, if you ship something on a common carrier, nobody can stop that truck. It's protected by the federal government. So they were both in New Jersey, then the judge threw the appeal out, back jurisdiction. That's how I got it. And the collection Sotheby's says was the holy grail of Michael Jackson memorabilia.
Wow.
Great story.
That's part of it, that's part of it. Then I lost it. I then get sued by Michael Jackson. Oh, first of all, after I got it back to my warehouse, I cataloged everything and photographed everything. I was having trouble selling it because the value of the Jackson name was way down because of all these allegations, right? So nobody wanted to pay what I really thought it was worth. So I'm gonna do a pay-per-view website and charge $4.99 to give you a virtual tour through my museum. I gave an exclusive story to People magazine, and they agreed to come out with the story the day that the website is ready. We have everything set up, the website is live, People goes live, Ernie Nassus did a big show on it. The problem is I don't have a merchant bank to collect the credit cards. I was so naive, I thought you call a credit card company up, right? No, you need a merchant bank. Well, since I came out of a bankruptcy, no merchant bank is gonna touch me. So the first day, 1.5 million hits at $4.99, I can't collect a penny. By Wednesday, 5 million hits at $4.99 and the bank is still broken. Thursday, I get served with a $100 million lawsuit by Michael Jackson and a $100 million lawsuit by Janet Jackson. They close my website down, okay? Now I can't afford a lawyer. The cheapest lawyer is $200,000. Mr. Vaccaro, you're in federal court in the Southern District of California with 2 clients with deep pockets. Nobody takes these on contingencies. We need evidence we're gonna be paid. Well, I don't have that kind of money. So I reached out to a friend of mine, a court reporter named Diane Diamond at Court TV. Diane, can Court TV help me? Can you help get me a lawyer? A week or so later, I got a phone call from a lawyer in New Orleans, Louisiana, by the name of Bert Pig, P-I-G-G. And it goes like this, Mr. Vaccaro, this is Mr. Pig, I understand you need my services. I says, I do, I don't know if I can afford them. He says, do you have $5,000? I said, yes, so I fly to New Orleans and meet Mr. Pig. Mr. Pig is a nighttime law professor at Tulane University. I want this as a class project. All your work will be done free of charge by my students under my supervision. Mr. Pig becomes my lawyer. Okay. Now this great big law firm, Laidley & Singer, that represented Michael Jackson, Michael didn't pay him. So, I'm jumping ahead. So the next thing that happens is Michael is charged criminally with child molestation, which means the civil suit is put on hold until the criminal trial is done. I had the DNA. I had Michael's DNA because in the wardrobe trunk, when you open up, had all these stage costumes, also was his soiled underpants. When Tom Sneddon found out about it, they put 2 armed guards from the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office around my warehouse until they could fly from California to get the DNA. After the trial, he's found not guilty, Michael. If you recall, he takes off with his 3 little kids to Bahrain, the country Bahrain. He never pays Laidley & Singer. He owed them $300. They make a motion to be relieved of counsel for non-payment. Mr. Pig makes a motion to dismiss. The case is dismissed with prejudice. I'm the only one that can use Michael's name and likeness on the internet, me. Okay, now put that beside it. Now, I'm still trying to sell it. Gene Lowy, my former brother-in-law, lived in Boca Raton, Florida, in a gated community. Calls me up, I got a buyer for you. He says, the guy's name is Richard Altamar, very, very wealthy man, has a public company. Oh, okay. He flies up in a private jet, lands at the Wall Airport, has a limo, bring him to my warehouse in Asbury Park, goes through everything. Give you $4 million for it. Wow. Okay, here's the deal. I'll wire you $150,000 tomorrow. Then I'm going to give you $80,000 a month until it's paid off. But in the meantime, I want to have an auction to generate publicity for my company. You get 100% of the auction proceeds, and then I pay $80,000 a month until it's paid. Then you give me your master recording tapes and all the photography. Not a bad deal. It's fine. Have a big auction at Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas, a 2-day auction. Brings in over $1 million. This is supposed to be the first of 2 auctions. 3 weeks later, I go to collect my money. No money. This guy gets thrown in jail for fraud by the Security Exchange Commission without a trial. He had a company called Universal Express. If you recall, after 9/11, if you went to the airport, you could wait hours to go through. They check your suitcase, you take your shoes out, all that kind of stuff. His gimmick is he's gonna pick your suitcase up at your house, it'll be waiting for you at your hotel, gonna cost you $50. He didn't have plane one, he didn't have truck one. He would hire Federal Express or United Parcel, might cost $100, but he's charging you $50, generating money and taking the money out of the company. They gave him a warning. So he didn't heed the warning and they threw him in jail. They put a federal trustee in, and I am now nothing but a general unsecured creditor to the federal government, and they take everything.
Oh.
They come after the recording tapes, which they never got, but they took all the money, all the stuff that was not sold, etc. So now I sue the trustee, I sue the auction house, sue the guy in jail. About a year later, the trustee comes to me, says, I'm gonna make you a deal. If you pay me $30,000, if I pay her $30,000 for her legal fees and give Michael back the 15 items of personal property that he wants, Janet the 15 or so items she wants, I will give you the rest of the memorabilia and we'll release all the lawsuits. I agreed. What I'm gonna tell you, you can't make this stuff up. Michael Jackson signs the release, also consents to the fact that I own a physical property, the music, all these tapes. I didn't own the intellectual property, but I own the physical property. The next day, Michael Jackson is dead. I have the last signature of Michael Jackson.
Oh, for goodness sake. Is that worth something?
Well, I can't touch it right now because it's in a sealed document.
I see.
So what happens is I fly it up now, there's 500 or 600 items left over in the warehouse in Las Vegas that the trustee, put under lock and key. Fly out there with Keith Lowy and with Mark, and have a truck waiting. And there's 2 lawyers that meet me from the Greenberg Trial law firm, Michael Jackson's law firm, ready to get their documents. So I'm sitting checking things off, so probably 3 hours later, Mark says, that's it. I said, what do you mean that's it? There's 400 or 500 items missing. I said, you know what, maybe they're commingled with the stuff in New York at Guernsey's warehouse where we're gonna go to in 2 days. I said, at least we know what we have here, put it in there, and let's get going. Michael's lawyer says, you're not going nowhere. I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm accusing you of stealing Michael Jackson's property. I said, you're crazy. I said, you better have a big gun because we're leaving now. You're not going nowhere. Gets a federal judge on the phone. I got all this on tape. Are you Mr. Vaccaro? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have a lawyer in Las Vegas? No. You better get one. You're going to be in my courtroom tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You're being charged criminally with stealing Michael Jackson's property, and I'm issuing a restraining order. You're not leaving Las Vegas. Oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. So a friend of mine said, Henry, I'm going to take you back to the hotel. You got to sit in the steam room and get a massage. He says, they don't care who you are. Look what they did to O.J. Simpson. Just calm down. Let your nephew and son-in-law handle it. So Keith Lowy went to the guy and said, look, we didn't steal nothing. See, all the documents they were looking for were paper documents. They thought I'm stuffing them in the costumes and stuff as they're handing them to me and putting. He said, we're going to take everything out of the case. I don't care if we stay till midnight. They went through everything. Nothing was there. They released me to go home. Go to Guernsey's, still 500 items missing. Bring them back home. My son goes online, there's a company called Clark County Auctions selling my stuff. So I have the auctioneer arrested. He said, you can't arrest me. He said, I have a bill sale. I bought it from the warehouseman. The warehouseman had a lien, which was bullshit. He said, I paid him $50,000 green cash in a parking lot. Nobody's found that guy as of today. So we got some of the items back. 8 months later, Henry goes online. Heritage auction in Dallas, Texas is selling the rest of my stuff. So I have my lawyer send him a letter, if you sell this, we're going to charge you with theft. So the guy did the right thing, even though I thought it was the wrong thing. I was really pissed at the time. He sued me. The auctioneer sued me and the guy that consigned it to them to determine the rightful owner, which was the right thing to do. Now I got to fly to Dallas. I have to get a lawyer. The lawyer wants $80,000. The stuff could be worth 100, it could be worth 100, and you could still lose. What would you do? What would you do?
What did you do?
I did something as resourceful Henry at it again. I went to the Internal Revenue Service. I said, look, I owe you some money on my collection. The only way I can pay is if I get this stuff back and it's sold as one collection, everybody gets paid. I said, I want you to be my lawyer. The lady says, you're crazy. They became my lawyer, won the case and sent the stuff back. How about that?
Unbelievable.
Okay? That's part of it.
Huh.
So, then I got sued by the Michael Jackson estate. I went through hell. But here's what I have left. Over 40 master recording tapes of Michael Jackson when he was 16 years old. Unreleased tapes, okay. What I thought was the real, the real money in the memorabilia being the costumes, and it was all these tapes. I didn't know what they were. Big tapes, each one was made 40 pounds, 2-inch tapes. Well, I have a friend, Guy Vistola, in Farmingdale, has a recording studio. I took the tapes out there, and each tape had a tracking sheet which showed what was on it. And he went through it, he says, Henry, these are from their television shows of 1976 and 77. He said, the only problem is they're over 30 years old. If I try to play them, I could destroy them. He says, I'm going to do something. He rented a van and went to Nashville. There's a company in Nashville that bakes the tape in an oven to preserve it. Now he preserved the tapes, and we now download them. We have digital copies of all these incredible songs and shows and everything. Okay. Problem is, I can't do anything with it because I don't own the copyright. I own a physical property, not the intellectual property. Okay. Well, how do you determine who has the copyright? So I go online to the Copyright Office, and it doesn't go back past 1980. So I drove myself 2 years ago to Washington, went through the Copyright Office, and found microfilm that showed that Joe Jackson, the father, owned the copyrights. So I come back and I tell my lawyer. He said, wait a minute, Henry, something is fishy here. I said, what do you mean? He said, didn't Joe file bankruptcy in 1999 to screw you? I said, yes. I'm going to pull the file. He pulls the file. He never disclosed that he owned the copyrights. He says, my professional legal opinion is that is an asset unadministered by the trustee. But the only way you could get it is if you could ever get that bankruptcy reopened, which is next to impossible. And even if you reopened it, the Michael Jackson estate would outbid you. They've got deep pockets. Well, I got a hold of Mr. Pig. He knew a great bankruptcy lawyer in California. I met this guy in California. And we petitioned the court, and they reopened a 20-year-old bankruptcy of Joe Jackson, the father. Okay. Now here's the kicker. The only people that get noticed are the creditors of that bankruptcy. So of the 65 creditors of his bankruptcy, 40 are dead, and Michael was alive, so the Michael Jackson estate never gets the notice of the sale. I'm the only guy that shows up, and for $25,000, I buy all the copyrights, the intellectual property, to the music, the television shows, and the name The Jacksons. I own that now.
God.
So I'm in the process of now monetizing that.
So that's where you're,
That's where we are right today as we're sitting here. In Asbury, I put together a nonprofit group, and we're trying to make a proposal to Madison Marquette, who owns the convention hall, and Paramount Theater, to take it over and raise the funds privately, like they did at the Count Basie Theater, to save that beautiful building. I have what I think is a great board of directors. I have Ernie and Assis on the board. I have Philip Michaels, whose family used to own Michael's Restaurant in Asbury. Philip is now the chairman of a major investment banking firm in New York. I have Carter Sackman, who's a major developer in downtown Asbury. I have Bruce Belfer, who owns a lighting company. I have Chuck Latta, who's a CPA and former CFO of a major construction company. And I just talked to Beth Stavola yesterday about joining the board. So, you know, we got a good board. I mean, you can't drive to Asbury unless you're on a road that Stavola paved.
Well, the Berkeley Carteret was you got an award there for being
For public and private. So,
you want to use that again?
there's money available that Madison Marquette can't get. So if they've got to dump minimally $20 million more in the building, you can't never get a return on your investment of $20 million in that building. We can raise the money, and I mean, there's no doubt I can raise the money, no doubt at all. So that's my next.
That's
venture.
so.
Keeps
And
me going.
in 10 years we'll have you back, and you can tell us how that worked out.
So that's.
You can close.
I think we're good here now.
Okay,
We hit a
thanks
lot of
very
stuff
much.
today, didn't we?
We did, yeah,
But
had a lot of.
These were marvelous, marvelous stories that should be told. And